So hello, welcome to the latest Google Hangout that we're doing here. Apologies if my voice starts to crack during this. I've had a long day broadcasting today, so voice is a little bit tired, but wanted to put a few thoughts down in this latest video here and go through some talking points in what has been a pretty eventful week so far in this first wave of free agency, but not maybe in the ways that a lot of people were hoping for. But this is the main thought that I have today. And it was late last night, like many of you, I'm sure. My final thought of the day turned to the Seahawks yesterday and what has been a pretty underwhelming free agency so far. There's been some big moves, but they haven't brought many players in, and fans are starting to wonder what the plan is. And you know when fans are starting to panic because one big topic comes up, and that is always Russell Wilson, and people end up starting talking about whether or not they should start doing, but they should have dealt him and stuff like that. Whenever that topic comes up, you know something's not right with the Seahawks, whether it's on the field or currently in free agency. So a lot of people wondering what the plan is. And it kind of dawned on me right before I went upstairs to go to sleep that, well, isn't this exactly what we all expected anyway, and what we've been talking about for the last few weeks? That there were going to be changes on defense, that they were going to be coming younger and cheaper. You know, we've talked about that an awful lot on the blog, in the comment section. We had the Michael Silver article after the Rams game. Changes on the defense were fully expected. A lot of people weren't even interested in keeping Sheldon Richardson, or at least thought that he would be moving on. Yet the reaction to him signing with Minnesota was one that was of disappointment, that people couldn't believe it. And maybe that's because of the price, and that people thought, well, I didn't want him for $15 million a year, but he went to the Vikings for $8 million plus, I think, $3 million worth of incentives. People probably thought that was a fair deal in the end, but ultimately, a lot of people didn't want to keep Sheldon Richardson, didn't think that his production warranted it, didn't want to build around him as a core player. He's moved on to Minnesota. Most people felt that Jimmy Graham and Paul Richardson were going to leave the team. They've left the team. We thought they were going to re-sign Bradley McDougald. It was the first thing they did in free agency, was to re-sign Bradley McDougald, so no big surprises there. He had a good season with the Seahawks last year. He's back. We thought they were going to do most of their work to repair the running game during the draft. They haven't signed any offensive linemen so far. They didn't sign a veteran running back so far. It looks as if they're waiting to save that for the draft, which again is something that we thought they were going to do. We thought that they might consider a hedge running back, and they kind of have. You know, they've met with Jonathan Stewart. They've met with DeMarco Murray. They could still sign DeMarco Murray. We thought they might consider that. They have. We also thought that they would look at cheap prove-it deals with receivers, and they certainly are. You know, they've signed one already. They've traded for one. They're meeting with Marcus Wheaton. They're going to meet with Terrell Pryor. So they're looking for those shorter-term contracts with receivers, bring them in and see if they've got something to offer for the team. So not a big surprise there either. We thought they were going to add a veteran blocking tight end. They have. They've signed Ed Dixon from Carolina, who was one of the better pass blocking tight ends in the NFL last year. And we knew they needed to sign a Sam Leo, and we talked about this on the blog as well, and highlighted the severely limited options in the draft at that position this year. You might be looking at Harold Landry, but he's probably going to go in the top 40. That might be a little bit too rich for the Seahawks. There's not really the kind of player that I could see them going for. You're probably talking about Lorenzo Carter. You're probably talking about Josh Sweat potentially, although I think he's more of a speed edge rusher than a Sam Leo. And you may be looking at someone like Leon Jacobs at Wisconsin, who I think might be more of a will or a middle linebacker person that you develop there, but has got some ability to play the Sam maybe in the early years and do some pass rushing as well. So, not a great deal of options at the Sam Leo there. So they've gone out and signed Barkevious Mingo, a former top 10 pick as a Sam Leo from 2013. So they've gone and addressed that need as well. We didn't expect a big free agency splurge. I mean, who on the blog or on the internet, on Seahawks Twitter or on any of the forums or in any of the radio shows that you've listened to over the last 3 weeks have said they can't wait for free agency to start because the Seahawks are going to go and throw a lot of money at this? Nobody's been talking about that. All of the talk has been about changes, cuts to the defense, people being traded, trying to get younger and cheaper. Nobody's been talking about a big spend in free agency. And we didn't really expect one more go with the old band, getting the band back together, putting Sherman and Chancellor and Averill and Thomas and all of these, and Bennett and all of these players together for one last tilt at the Super Bowl. Not many people were expecting that. Some might have hoped that that was going to happen, but that certainly wasn't a big expectation. And I think even the people that wanted it to happen probably didn't expect that it was going to, because there was too much smoke for there to not be some fire there with regard to that. So having run through that big list of everything that has happened so far, that's exactly what we thought might happen. Everything that we projected, predicted, talked about has come to the fore. They've done pretty much what has been quite a predictable free agency so far. And I think some of the frustration here isn't so much with what is happening. It's just that reality's playing out, that maybe the Seahawks needed an off-season like this where they were going to have to rebuild a little bit. They were going to have to make some very difficult decisions. They were going to have a pretty quiet free agency and look for some value and competition and guys who may be on their second or third opportunity, that this is it for them. Someone like Jerome Brown comes in. What happens if he fails next year? What happens to Ed Dickson in his career if he's a flop in Seattle? What happens to Barkevius Mingo? Is he going to get another contract if it doesn't work out with the Seahawks? And they'd probably say to someone like Barkevius Mingo, hey, you've never tapped into your potential as a top 10 pick. Come to us. We've shown that we can develop defensive ends at a kind of your age. Look what we did with Chris Clemens, for example. Look at the work we've done with Dion Jordan. Come to us and we'll help make you the kind of player that meant the Cleveland Browns wanted to spend a 6th overall pick on you. And that's an opportunity for him. And that seems to be what they're looking for here. People that they can develop, people who fit a profile, people who are fast and quick and have got something to offer in terms of who they are. Ed Dickson, it's a blocking tight end. Barkevius Mingo, it's a Sam Leo with a lot of potential there. Doesn't mean that these guys are going to work out, but that seems to be what they're looking for. Now, some of the frustration is also because, this is a team that is used to competing and winning, and every year you go into the season thinking this is going to be a Super Bowl run. And, I feel the same way as everybody else on that. The idea of watching this team next year in 2018 and not feeling like it is possible or even probable that competing for the Super Bowl is a possibility. That's a foreign concept for Seahawks fans. People will say there are bandwagon fans out there, but there are going to be people who have come to the Seahawks probably from 2009, 2010, who've been following the team for a decade now, who've just been used to this upward trajectory. And are now, maybe it's just hit a point there where it's going to dip a little bit before it can come up again. And it's going to be foreign to them, watching a team that is transitioning a little bit rather than competing right at the top. They built a contender that wasn't just competing, but it was really fun to watch, with some very interesting characters, with players that you wanted to root for, that you felt a real connection with. This was a team filled with, at the very least, Ring of Honor candidates and probably a few Hall of Famers as well, that have just done things that other defenses weren't able to do, like being the #1 defense 4 years in a row in DVOA. That's not happened before. And the Seahawks, quite rightly, this Legion of Boom era warrants being considered right up there with the very best defenses in history. And I hope that it's going to get the respect that it deserves. But those times are gone now. This is a new chapter for the Seahawks, and it just so happens that some of the old cast are still there: Russell Wilson, Bobby Wagner, possibly Earl Thomas, certainly Pete Carroll and John Schneider. But that previous era is gone, and they're moving on now, and they're trying to build a new group. And they're probably not going to do that by throwing $18 million a year at this player and $12 million a year at this player. That you don't build a team in free agency. You build a team through the draft. And coming onto the draft, there's another frustration, isn't it? They spent all last year going all in for a championship. Just a few months later, they're going about changing this, and they haven't got the draft stock because they did go for it last year. So Sheldon Richardson was a 1-year rental for the second rounder. Dwayne Brown's coming. He's still going to be with the Seahawks. I still think that's a pretty good trade. We're not going into this offseason wondering what's happening with George Fant, wondering how they're going to get a left tackle, having to get into the Nate Solder sweepstakes, for example, and spend him more money than any other offensive lineman in the league, which is probably not warranted. They've got Dwayne Brown for at least another year. So I still think that's a pretty decent trade. But in terms of being able to rebuild, they don't have the kind of draft stock, for example, that the Indianapolis Colts have got, and that is another frustration as well. But I think one thing that has to be said here is that this is the worst possible time to judge the Seahawks. Don't judge them now. Not in the middle of a spending splurge that they were never going to be really part of. The time to judge this team is after the draft, when things have settled down and we just see the full picture of what exactly they were doing this offseason. Because the 2018 season can still be fun. It might not be fun in the way that 2013, 2012, 2014, 15, 16 was, that they might win it all. Perhaps it's going to be more like 2011, when you're just thinking to yourself, I can't wait to see which 4 or 5 young guys are going to develop and who is going to emerge as the next group and the next core, who is going to emerge as the foundation of another contender, growing and turning this team back into a force in the NFC. That can still be fun, even if at the end it's probably not going to end up in a Super Bowl. So there are still some things to be determined as we work through this. The big question mark that's left to be determined more than anything is what's going to happen with Earl Thomas. That's first and foremost. That story's gone very quiet again. This has tended to happen this off-season. You've seen reports suggesting one thing, then reports suggesting another. The latest example of this being Jason LaCanfora from CBS, who's got some connections to the Seahawks and has broken stories on the Seahawks in the past, reported that teams were talking and Seattle could get a first-round pick and a third-round pick in a trade. Then we see Ian Rappaport, who's been reporting very different things this offseason, saying that the Seahawks are going to keep Earl Thomas. He repeated on the Rich Eisen show immediately afterwards, I think it was the day after LaCanfora's report, saying his stance on the topic hasn't changed, that he still believes that Earl Thomas isn't going anywhere. So what's exactly going on here? Are the Seahawks using the media anyway to try and find a way to get a trade partner, to try and give someone a nudge to make this deal? Are the Seahawks keeping hold of Earl Thomas? Are they trading him? There's no real clarity there at all. If something is going to happen, it's probably going to happen in the next few days, you'd imagine. We're still seeing big moves. We've seen the Jets moving up today and making a big trade. You would imagine that it's something that teams, if they're going to trade for Earl Thomas, they'd want to do it now. You don't see big names being traded on draft day, for example. I don't think it would, you're really going to wait another month and a bit before making a deal for Earl Thomas. If you're going to do it, you generally tend to do it during this first, second wave of free agency. So if it's going to happen, you'd imagine it's going to happen pretty soon. But when you notice that Tyrann Mathieu is getting such a modest contract as a free agent as the one he signed, and the safety market is ice cold at the moment in free agency. I mean, it's Kenny Vaccaro still hasn't got a team. Eric Reid still hasn't got a team. It's hard to see how this works out well for either party. Is a team willing to pay Earl Thomas and invest high draft picks and then pay him a massive new contract? And I can't see it personally at the moment. And that leaves the Seahawks needing to decide what they're going to do. Do they take a deal that maybe doesn't include a first rounder? Do they sit tight with Thomas for another year and push this situation forward into 2019? Maybe, but they did that 12 months ago with Richard Sherman and simply ended up releasing Sherman. So that might play on their minds a little bit here, that whatever decision they make, Earl has one more year left on this deal, so they've got to make a decision in 12 months, one way or another. And if they've already decided that this is going to be his final season, one way or another, they might be more inclined to just take whatever they can get to a certain point. I mean, they're not going to give him away. They're not going to trade him for a fourth or a fifth rounder or whatever like that. But if they're not getting the first rounder, are they then going to start thinking about a second rounder or a third rounder? I mean, this is why it's a complex situation. This maybe is why the trade's not happened yet. Maybe teams kind of feel the Seahawks are committed to trading Earl Thomas. And if they just wait this out a little bit, the price will come down as the Seahawks maybe get a bit more desperate to make this happen. And the Seahawks have got to prove to teams that, well, no, we're more than happy to keep Earl Thomas here. And that will encourage teams that, hey, they're not going to drop their price. If we want this guy, we've got to go and pay big. And that might be what we're seeing here in the dynamic with the media. You have one journalist saying the Seahawks might get a first and third round pick and are in talks to trade him. You get another journalist saying they're very committed to keeping him. So maybe that's the situation that's playing out. A quick reminder as well that the great value, and this is the last thing on the Thomas thing, the great value in this year's draft is going to be in rounds 2 and 3. So if you're a team picking late in the first, you might think, well, Earl Thomas is going to be better than any of the options late in round 1. You could still pick in rounds 2 and 3 if you just trade the first rounder. So you're still going to pick twice in the great range of the draft in rounds 2 and 3. You're going to tap into the value there, but you can also land Earl Thomas with your first pick. And, this is the kind of thing the Seahawks did in the past when they traded for Jimmy Graham and Percy Harvin. They looked at the options at like 25 range and said, we don't really like the first round options there. They go and trade their picks and get a really good proven veteran there, still maintain their second and third round picks that year. So is a team going to look at this and say, you know what, we'll happily use our picks in rounds 2 and 3, but we're going to use that first round pick on Earl Thomas? That's something to consider, especially if it's a team who's in contention at the moment, picking in the late 20s or the early 30s, that thinks that Earl Thomas could push them over the top. And there aren't that many sort of big free agents left on the market who can push a team forward. Maybe Earl Thomas could do that. So that would be a potential route through to a deal being completed. But then the Seahawks will be getting a late first rounder or maybe even an early second rounder, as opposed to, like Dallas's pick a number 19, for example, like a lot of people have talked about. And one final thing I wanted to talk about today, you may have noticed if you tuned in late and you're listening to this live, my voice is not very good. It's been a very busy day of broadcasting. So thank you for bearing with me. It sounds a little bit croaky at the moment. So I'm just going to wrap up with this Ndamukong Suh thing, which is got a lot of people talking. If they are going to sign him, it probably will be on their terms. I don't think they're in the mood to spend any big money on anybody at the moment. So if they're going to sign him, it's probably going to be on a deal that suits the Seahawks more than suits Ndamukong Suh. The D-line currently needs major help, in terms of quality and depth. It just isn't there right now. They don't really have anybody that can hang their hat on in the interior, apart from younger guys they hope take a step forward. And on the outside, they've got basically Frank Clark, and they're hoping that Dion Jordan's going to be more than just a guy who can show occasional flashes. They need some help on the defensive line. So they're going to have to make some moves one way or another, whether that's to sign some veterans or go heavy on the draft. But if Ndamukong Suh's all about big salary, it's probably not going to happen here. They might be playing on his desire to play in the Pacific Northwest, which could be something that he really wants to do. And if he's willing to take a bit of a discount to do it, then great. But they're also going to need to be convinced that he's going to be all in. And I think this is one of the big things. The culture has maybe shifted a little bit in Seattle, and I think they're going to want to bring people in who are all in for this team. So I think that's going to be another big thing with Ndamukong Suh. My prediction right now is that he probably won't sign for the Seahawks. He'll probably sign for somebody on a huge contract. They've got a lot of cap space, who maybe feel they're in a better position to spend right now. But it's going to depend on whether he has that motivation to move to Seattle and whether he's going to be willing to take a discount, which, according to some reports, he's not going to be willing to do. He is going to be quite invested in getting a big contract deal here. I'm going to wrap this up right now because my voice is really about to crack. Just wanted to put a few thoughts out there as well. Thank you for listening to this video. We'll be back very soon with another Google Hangout.